So, you were talking about adoptive parents and one of the things I remember you saying when we were talking about that was that they do qualify for benefits. There's an understanding that adoptive parents usually support the children that they adopt, but they do qualify for certain benefits up until the child is 21, right?
Right,
And
right.
because of that, you said that there are a few, not a lot, but a few that kind of abuse that. And so, but one thing I did ask you was, it said, are there support groups for adoptive parents? And you kind of said that there are support groups.
There are probably some support groups out there. There is a program once you adopt a child, they have a program through the county that they do have support groups. Now, I don't know how many people go to those support groups. I have never gone to any. I've always relied on my faith to carry me. I've also relied on therapy, and I've also relied on listening to my children because one of the things that I have learned from them is what their needs are. So sometimes, and kids don't always know what they need, but sometimes they have a sense of how they feel about certain things. So I don't necessarily join support groups, but I do listen to my children. But I also have relied on my therapist over the years. The therapists have always provided me with information that would help the children thrive, help them in different areas. And so, one thing that the therapists have done is provided me referrals to summer camps. My kids have gone to summer camp every year from the age 7 to up to 18. Every summer, they go to summer camp. There's a big brother. I mean, Jewish Big Brothers and Sisters camp. There's Salvation Army camp. There are lots of camps that they go to, and sometimes it's only a week, sometimes it's 2 weeks, sometimes they go to three camps in one summer. So they're gone half the summer doing things that kids do, play, interact with children of other cultures, horseback riding, swimming, playing sports, all of those things they have done at camp. In addition to that,
Those are
in
lifelong
addition,
memories.
yeah, yeah,
Yes.
and my daughter still talks about it. She tells her friends, "Yeah, my mom sent us to camp every summer. We always had a good time. We always had a ball. We always made friends. We got a chance to meet kids from other countries, which they did. They met kids from Israel. Because big Jewish big brothers and sisters camp brings the kids in once in the summer. They bring the Jewish kids in, so it's a cultural experience for our children, and it's a cultural experience for those children. Salvation Army is more of a Christian camp, and they focus on um, depositing faith into our children. And then they have several, two or three different camps. Like they have the enrichment camp, then they have the music camp. So my youngest son, I think the last time he went to Salvation Army camp, he learned how to play an instrument, which is something he was never interested in doing before. But it was an experience for him during the summer, and he was able to play the instrument. They even had like a little choir, the kids that could sing, and they would sit around in the campfire and they would read Bible stories and just things that help them to grow,
Yeah.
help them to thrive. And they weren't at home being bored, or you know. But in addition to all of that I did while my children were growing up, every summer I took them on vacation. So we would take a trip to SeaWorld for a week. We went to a resort in San Diego for a week. We would go to Vegas and they would go to Circus for a week. So I always did something with them every single summer.
Just awesome.
Yeah.
Before we get into talking about foster parents, I did want you to tell me about a kid that you were telling me about a positive experience, and he ended up in the Navy SEALs. Can you tell me about that kid?
That young man is my oldest adopted son's youngest brother. He he and two other siblings were adopted by a gentleman, and that young kid, when he was, I want to say he was 10 or maybe 11, he developed an interest in swimming, and his adoptive father wanted to cultivate that gift, his interest. He just kept pushing him and pushing him. So he put him in swimming, the summer swimming program, and then the young man developed skills that would help him. And I remember when he was 16, I believe, the father called me and said, "Hey, I'm gonna put him in. He's gonna try out for the Junior Olympics." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, he's just that good." And so I guess he tried out. I don't know if I think he did make it close to qualifying, but he didn't qualify for, you know, to get into the whole program. But the young man decided that when he graduated from high school, that he was going to go to the Navy, and his goal is to become a Navy SEAL because of his interest in the water. And so we're talking about when he was 3 years old, the mother had him on the street. She was doing drugs. He was eating out of garbage cans because that was his survival. He was three. And I think somebody saw them, and they got picked up by the county, and that's how they ended up as adopted children, because somebody was looking for to adopt children, and so he and his brother and his sister got adopted by the same person.
Said foster, but he was adopted. He wasn't foster.
Well, he was foster initially
Oh, okay.
because they most adopted children start off as foster. Let me just tell you about that first. In order for a child to be adopted, the child first there has to be, now this is just your county adoptions. This is not private adoption. This is county adoptions. In order for a child to be adopted, their parental rights have to be terminated. So what the county does is they identify children that need to be adopted, preferably the younger children, because people are looking for younger children, and they search the family background. So once they search the family background to see if there's anybody in the family that wants to take that child, if that child ends up in foster care, is there an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, a grandpa, a grandma, a relative, a distant relative, even someone that's not biologically connected to them, but maybe a member of a friend of the family that knew the parent and wants to take that child as an adopted child. They have to do that first, because the county has to always terminate the parental rights before a child can actually be free to be adopted. So that's why some of your children that are teenagers never get adopted, because sometimes they can't find families. Sometimes they can't connect the dots. So they can't terminate those parental rights. And that's unfortunately it happens a lot, you know, because sometimes the parents are gone somewhere, the parents are locked up, or they're on drugs and they're in the streets, or they're in another state or somewhere else, and the kid ends up in foster care. And how do you track down a parent that's living on the street? You can't, you know. And so sometimes the now I know that there have been situations where social workers have been aggressive and said, well, we've been looking for this family for 2 3 years, and we can't find them, and this kid needs to be adopted because they're young, and there's an order for adoption. So they'll terminate those parental rights. But what happens is if a parent comes back and says you sent my kid to adoption and you didn't ask my permission, then they can sue the county. That's how that works.
That leaves a lot of kids to linger in the system because they
Yeah,
don't want that to
yeah.
happen.
Because they can't, a lot of times they can't find the family,
Yeah.
and
You
if
know,
they can't find the family, they cannot terminate the parental rights.
yeah.
Um, they have to be terminated before they can a child can be adopted. So
From my experience as a middle school teacher, I know that many foster parents are really struggling with their children, and I say that because as a when I was teaching and I taught the in-school intervention class, which dealt primarily with behavior, a great deal of my repeat offenders were foster kids. And now I know this is not across the board. There were a lot of foster kids who were doing great, but there were some that were really struggling. And so I asked you while we were talking, what advice would you give to foster parents? And I wrote down a list of five. So when I read each one, I want you to kind of expound on it. Okay.
okay,
So the
okay,
first one you said was be as honest as you can with the child about their origin. Don't leave them in the dark.
yes, absolutely. Every child needs to know where they came from. Even if but of course you have to be astute as a parent, as an adult,
Yes.
to
Use
be very
discretion.
sensitive
Yes.
to what you tell the child. You
I
know,
see.
sometimes people will tell a kid something and they think the kid is emotionally mature enough to handle the information. In other words, if you took a 5-year old and that 5-year old is asking, "Where's my mom? Where's my mom? Where's my mom? I thought my mom was coming." You have to become creative as to what you tell them. You don't say, "Well, your mama didn't want you, so they threw you away, and that's why you live with me." So you just destroyed that kid. You just destroyed them. You know. But if you got a 16-year-old, you can be straight up and honest with them and say, your mom can take care of you. That's why I'm here, and I'm here to be your substitute parent. I will do whatever I can to help you to thrive and to help you to get through this situation. But we have to be careful at the age and the maturity of these children, and not just tell them anything. And then some people can be really cruel, when they say things to these children and they don't realize those words hurt.
Sometimes they do realize that the words hurt. And they say it anyway.
Yeah, they do. They do. Because they have, hurt people. So sometimes they're hurt themselves and their little, ego blast out, they want to dump on somebody else. You're right. Absolutely.
The
So
next thing that you mentioned was journal. Keep a record of the good and bad.
absolutely. Absolutely. I have journals. I have tons of journals over the years. Anything significant that my child has done is in that journal. Whether it was they were in a school play or whether they were doing a vision board. Now, my youngest son, um, and I told you had speech issues, but when he was in second grade, okay, he excelled so well. They had a project at the school at in his classroom where the teacher told them that they had to make a vision board. So she told the kids what a vision board was. Okay. He's 7 years old now. Okay. He's in second grade. So he's 7 years old. And he comes home and he says, "I have to do a vision board." And I said, "What are you going to do a vision board? How are you going to do a vision board? What are you going to do? What are you going to put on it?" He says, "I'm going to do a mommy vision board." And I said, "You're going to do a mommy vision board?" So he said, "Okay, mommy, you have to give me pictures. I need pictures of you when you were a little girl. I need pictures of all your favorite things." This kid put together a vision board with my uh, second grade picture on it, my favorite book to read, which which is a picture of the Bible, my favorite music, which is gospel music, pictures of, I mean, fabulous. And then he had to present it to the class. Now, all the kids had to do this, but my little 7 year old, who could not talk when he was 4, is now doing vision boards and doing presentations in front of his classmates. Now, to me, that was good as gold because we're talking about a kid that people used to make fun of because he couldn't read. And I told him, you can read the pictures. And from that, it I think it just catapulted his mind. He's like, I'm not going to let people talk about me. I'm going to learn how to read. And he just took it to the next level. So,
That
you
leads
know,
me to the
we,
next question. That leads me to the next thing you were saying
mm,
about next thing you would advise is you said learn from your children. They have much
absolutely,
to teach us if we allow them to.
absolutely. As we get older, we
Uh-huh.
become jaded. We become jaded. We have a tendency because I'm a certain age, I don't do that anymore. I don't do this anymore. But when a kid comes home from school and they tell you something that their friend is going through or the parent is going through, well, mommy, guess what I heard? They are teaching you something that you need to connect to because now they're showing you that they're paying attention to life. You checked out in some areas, but they haven't. So you can learn from them. You know, you can learn a lot of things from the things that they experience. Um, and I was talking to my sister earlier today, and she works at a school with children that have some behavior issues, and she says I am learning so much from these little guys. You know, she said I come home exhausted every day because they wear me out. She said, but I'm learning so much from them. And then you also learn what not to say and what hurts their feelings. So you don't take that,
Yeah.
you know, for granted. And you know, back in the days when we were kids, they said, do as I say and not as I do. You can't, that doesn't work anymore. I used to hear parents say that. Don't do with me, don't do what I do. Do as I say and do what don't you can do don't do you, do me. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. So you have to let them, they have perfect little minds, perfect little thoughts. You just have to take the time to listen to them. You really do.
Each every time you give an answer, it leads us right into the next one that you gave.
Okay.
The other one that you said was to model love for them. Teach
Absolutely.
them to love through the difficulties by loving them through their difficult times.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to show them love because, you know, how many kids actually get a hug every day? How many kids actually hear somebody say, I love you every day? You know, you know, not that I'm such a perfect person, but I get that from my kids every single day. If I'm talking to them on the phone before they hang up, I love you, mom, every day. Every day I get that. And I think it has to be reciprocated because kids need to know somebody loves them. They also need to know that there's a God, a perfect God who loves them. They need to know that. And if we don't tell them that, who's going to tell them? Because the streets are not going to tell them that. The streets are going to tell them how to cheat and lie and steal, you know. But they have to know that there is a perfect God that created them that loves them. And we have to show that love to them. Hmm.
Again, you led me right into the best advice, which was sometimes we're the only Bible they get to see. And you said that the Bible is one of your favorite books.
It is.
And so, you know, so you said sometimes we're the only Bible they get to see, you
That's right.
know?
That's
Yeah.
right. You know, Marvin Winans has a song out. It's not a new song; it's really old, but he gives the story about how he went to a conference and he was to speak at this conference, and outside of this church where he was, there was a big commotion. People were arguing and fighting and going on and on and on and on. And he said that one of the other preachers or deacons or somebody said, "Oh, they're out there making all that noise, all in front of the church. They don't have any respect for God or whatever." And it led him, he said, it got downloaded in his spirit. And he wrote a song. And that song says, if who's going to tell them if we don't tell them? How do we, how can you criticize someone for their behaviors if you don't tell them Jesus loves them? If you don't tell them that the creator of the universe, the creator of our soul, loves them.
A lot of what you said really feeds into what we preach in the Village Project when we talk about empowering parents to be the change that their children need. You're basically showing the child what life should look like for them.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
you're showing them what their life should look like when they get older,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and it gives them direction.
Yes.
It really does.
Yeah.
When you're modeling love, you're showing them what love looks like because a lot of them have never really seen it.
They don't know what it means. They
Yeah,
don't know what it means.
yeah.
And I'm gonna say this. I'm not perfect. I never have been perfect, but I serve a perfect God. And so even if I'm out of order, I have to come back and say, you know what, I was out of order. Let me fix this. And I think that's where sometimes we as adults we err with our children because we're not willing to say, you know what, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that, or I'm sorry, I didn't, you know what, I should have done that, I should have said that differently, because we are human as well. We do live in flesh, and we are subjected to error, and we're subjected to problems just like the rest of the world. And so we have to, you know we have to admit to our humanity, knowing that God still loves us through our mess, because our mess becomes our message, you know. And so I don't pretend to be perfect. I never have. But I've tried to be consistent. Someone else I know that was adopting children, and they came to me and asked me for it. Can you just give me a little bit of advice? And the one thing I said to them was, be consistent. And one thing I remember my mother always said to me when my children were very small, she said, never make a promise that you cannot keep. You got to be intentional. Ergo, my business.
We go into that. Listening to everything that you're talking about, when you adopt children, you take on full responsibility to teach
Absolutely.
them the way of to live. And one thing that you told me about is you said that you gave your kids a tool. You gave your children a tool that you felt like would help them. And it was your favorite book you've mentioned was the Bible, but you just didn't put an ordinary Bible in their hand. Tell me about the tool that you gave them.
Oh, the Adventure Bible.
Yeah.
The Adventure Bible is like a comic book, and it's hard copy. It is the Bible in comic form. Now it doesn't take anything away from the actual King James version of the Bible. It actually breaks down every scripture, but you see the characters in this Bible as real people, and you see the colors. And we know children are attracted to color. When I first saw that book on the shelf, I think I was at Walmart or somewhere, and I saw it, and I went, "Whoa, what is this?" And I couldn't put it down. And so I've been buying them ever since. And I give them to various children. And I say, because I think that what happens is a lot of kids are visual learners. They're kinesthetic. So because they are visual learners, that is a book that's going to attract their attention, even if they don't read it. they're looking at the pictures, and those pictures will draw them in. And as those pictures are drawing them in, let me read the little scripture that goes with this character. Who is Abraham? Who was Isaac? Who was Jacob? Who is Jesus? It's in the book.
Yeah. You know what?
Because you give a kid a regular traditional Bible, it's like,
Yeah,
this is kind of
gonna
boring.
it's gonna sit on the shelf and collect
Just
dust,
to collect dust.
just like it
Yep.
does with a lot of adults too.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
one thing you
So
said too while we were talking on the phone is you said visuals help children, but they
they
also
do.
help adults.
They do. They
So,
do.
that
Because
was a little
because
nugget.
there are adults that are visual as well. I mean, you know, you we always, as parents, we want our kids to go to college. When they graduate from high school, you go to college and get you a college degree, but how many of them really um thrive going to college? No, I'm not against going to college, but how many of those visual learners really can get a full fledged college education if they're visual learners? And we all know that what college is all about. You got to write papers, you got to read. That becomes boring to a visual learner. That's hard for them. So a lot of times they have to have the visuals. I had someone tell me, "Oh, when I was in college, I loved the videos the constant videos because they're visual. They have to see those videos in order to understand the subject matter." Me, I'm a reader. I'm a bookworm. I always have been since I was a child. So me, I could pick up a book and think nothing of it. I spend hours in the bookstore, but I didn't think my kids would be the same. I said, well, maybe they won't be like me. Now, a couple of them are like me, but the rest of them are not.
You know, one of the things that I'm usually trying to extract from my guest speakers is I try to pull habits that they have or they did with their kids so that I can make a list of things to share with parents who are struggling. And last week we had a guest speaker and she shared how her parents took her to they traveled to local spots a lot. And so
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I shared a little bit about how my father, we got into the station wagon and he took us to spots that were all within about 20 miles of our home. But we
Right.
did it every weekend that we got out, and that actually did something for us.
Yeah.
So as I was listening to you talk, it reminded me of a habit that my mom kind of did with us. She took us to church twice a week, but Sunday school, I think, made the most impression on us because we learned a lot of little songs that we still remember to this day. We
Mm-hmm.
learned to read while we were sitting there reading those little memory texts and
Right.
things like that. We learned to read, and we didn't
Right.
realize that
Right.
we were. And so when we went to school, we were already advanced
Yeah.
above other kids because we were constantly with this habit, this good habit of reading scriptures, it was helping
Mm-hmm.
us. And
Mm-hmm.
so I appreciate what you shared about, putting the adventure Bible in your children's hands,
Mm-hmm.
good
Mm-hmm.
habit.
And that is one thing that our my mother did as well. She was a Sunday school scholar, and she used to say, "Church is not church without Sunday school. You must go to Sunday school. How do
Yeah.
you learn?" I mean, you can be an 8-year old sitting in there listening to a sermon, doesn't make any sense to you, but you're learning something in Sunday school. And you're right, the memory verses made. And I used to always tell people, my mother would say certain things from the Bible. She would quote scriptures, and I would go, I don't know what she is talking about. It didn't make any sense to me. But as I got older and I started to live for Christ for myself, I said, oh, I've had aha moments so much in my life because of the things that she deposited into me that I didn't even understand, you know? So I think sometimes it's important to have those moments where we remember the things that our parents did that really did help us, because a parent can't do it all alone. A parent cannot do it all alone. We it takes the village. It takes the uncle, the aunt, the cousin, the friend, the neighbor, the teacher. How many times do you hear kids say, my favorite teacher is the one that used to crack me on my knuckles. I mean, those kind of things. So it is a village. It is a life experience that we all go through because we get a little bit from everyone that we come in contact with, pretty much.
Should be the church. And
Oh,
so,
yeah.
yeah. But you know what? I've been really enjoyed talking to you. But before you go, I did want you to kind of talk about your father who made an impact on your life. Um, Esau, Easy, Ashmore. I'm gonna read three things that impressed me, and then I'm gonna let you just kind of go.
Okay.
The first of all, he took care of his children even when they were adults, and he left an inheritance. He was an
Yes.
entrepreneur who owned the first black automotive shop in Culver City, and he was a veteran of the Navy, and he was
Yes.
a cook, you know.
Yes.
So, and he was also handy with fixing cars. So, tell us about this man who actually inspired your business.
Let me tell you something else about my dad that I
Mm.
don't often tell people. My mother and father got married when my mother was 17 and my dad was 18. He went off to the Navy. But when my father married my mother, my grandparents had died. My mother's parents had died. My mother was the oldest. She was 17 when her parents died. Um, she had 8 siblings that were younger than her, and they were stair steps.
Yes, I
Stair
know this is
steps. My father became their guardian at
yes.
18 years old.
Mhm.
He became their guardian. All of the boys, when they turned 18, they went off to the military, different military. One went to the Navy. Well, yeah, my mother's oldest brother went to the Navy. Uh, Two of them went to the Air Force. One went to the Army, I believe. And all the girls stayed home. They were little girls. Um, my aunt reminded me not too long ago that she didn't like the fact that she had to wash dishes when she was a little girl. My mother was bossing her around. But this is something my father took on his shoulders as a man. And I have a great aunt who passed away a few years back. She was 91 when she died. And one thing she said to me before she died was, she said, I've never met a man like Esau Ashmore before in my life. And I said, what do you mean by that? She said, as a man, I've never seen a man take on a whole family. He marries a woman, and with her comes all her little siblings. And he took on the responsibility of feeding them, clothing them, and taking care of them. And I tell my sister all the time, I don't know how he did it. I It had to be the grace of God, because I don't know how he took care of them. And then when we came along, he took care of us. And he was the epitome of a man of integrity. He had a lot of integrity, he had a lot of wisdom. He left, before he died, he left a recording for each one of his grandsons because he had no sons. So each grandson has a word of wisdom from their grandfather before he died. Um, my father also, I think I remember, I was a little girl. I think I remember him working 2 jobs. We had a big house in Michigan before we moved to California. And I think I remember him working. I think I was 7 or 8 years old, but I think I remember him working 2 jobs to make sure that we had a roof over our head. We never slept on the street. We always had a warm bed to sleep in. We always had food on the table. Again, I don't know how he did it. And like you mentioned about your mom taking you on the little trips, my parents did the same thing. Our little trip when we came to California was Long Beach. We would go to the beach, to New Pike. It was New Pike back in the days. I don't know what it's called now, but it was New Pike. Now there's an aquarium there, and they've got all the restaurants and hotels and all that. But that was our place to hang out. And then I remember him taking us on a trip to Arizona in a station wagon, Michael. throwing us all in the station wagon. And I remember him wanting to visit the Indian reservation. I don't even remember how old I was, maybe 10, 11, or 12 or something like that. But he wanted to meet the Indian on the Indian reservation. And that was in Arizona. He actually bought some jewelry. And you know how they have the little feathers and stuff? He bought a few of those items when he took us on that trip. Um, Another thing about my dad worked for the Department of Water and Power. Um, when he started working there, everyone that worked there was Hispanic, and he felt like he couldn't really communicate with them. So he said, "I need to go learn how to speak Spanish so I can talk to them, communicate with these guys," and that's what he did. Now he didn't become fluent, but he learned enough to be able to communicate with them. So that is what has inspired me to name my business after him. It's called Easy's Intentional. It's Easy's after my dad, intentional after the things that my mother and father have done over the my lifetime before they passed away. Everything they did was intentional. And I have tried in my lifetime to be intentional with whatever it is I do. I don't play any games. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. I get criticized by some people. Well, why did you do that? Or why did you? That wouldn't be me. You're not me. You're not me. I'm going to be as intentional as my parents were because that's the way they raised me.
You know what? When I'm sitting here listening to your father, and just when you were saying the epitome and you said integrity, I was actually writing down the epitome and I wrote of community. That's who he was. In fact, I had a similar experience. My sister got married, and because my mother and father were so unstable, a lot of us ended up going to go stay with them.
Mm-hmm.
So my sister's husband kind of took us on a lot. And so I
Yeah.
can kind of relate to that. But you
Yeah.
know what? The one thing I can say, and I really mean this about your father, true community, and I can say this to you because I know you're a sister of the kingdom. I'm a kingdom believer, and I know you are too. But kingdom has an abundant mindset,
Mm-hmm.
whereas the men's government tends to have a scarcity mindset. They're
Yes.
always worried about who's taking something away from me. True community doesn't do that. True community sees to it that everybody gets their needs met, even if it sets them back a little bit.
Right.
And that's what I see in your father. That's what I see. That's the way the communities were back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to get back to that.
Mm-hmm.
We need to get
Mm-hmm.
back to there's enough to go around for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And we can all give a little to help those who are lacking. And there are quite a few people out there that are lacking. Parents
Oh,
are lacking,
absolutely.
are
Mm-hmm.
lacking the knowledge on how to raise kids, and they need our help. And so that's what we're trying to accomplish through the Village Project. And I just really enjoy talking with you. Even though this is like the second time we've kind of went over all of these things, I still get a joy just talking to you because I know that you have so much to give. One thing I'm gonna end this call on the thing, a quote your father made, because it
Mm-hmm.
kind of feeds into what I teach as a community. We need to be committed to learning. He said, "You have to learn at least two things, two new things every day.
Every day.
And if you only learn one thing today, then make up for it tomorrow and learn
That's
three
right.
things."
That's
What
right.
a great statement.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna hang that one on the wall too. You
Yeah.
know, I've got one from last week. I'm hanging this one on the wall for
Yeah.
this week. So I just thank you, Brenda. It's
Oh, no
been a
problem.
joy. And
Yeah.
believe me, we will be in contact with you, especially when we
All
start
right.
setting up those parent workshops. All right.
Okay. Well,
All
to
right. I
God be
thank
the
you for
glory.
and thank you for sharing your story.
All right. Take care now.
All right.
All
Bye.
right. Bye bye.
All right.